I haven't been yet. Diana's just come back, so I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say about this year's one. But straight from the literary festival, I go to Delhi and then on to Prayagraj for this year's Mela.
Purushottam.
Yeah, thanks. Before going into my own experience at Kumbh Mela, let me just recall that yesterday itself in the inaugural ceremony of this festival was described as the Sahitya Kumbh, the Kumbh of literature. And it actually serves as a reminder of the way in which the cultural memory of India and the idioms of Indian languages have preserved the idea of Kumbh. Kumbh is a celebration of faith, of course, but it is not just the celebration of faith, it is also the celebration of argumentation, disputation. One of the fascinating features of Kumbh, about which Jim hinted slightly, is about various akhadas, various sects of sadhus meeting, discussing the issues, and those issues are not always very abstract and spiritual. They are very, very hard secular issues also. Issues of power within the sect, issues of hierarchy within the sect, and these decisions are taken at the gatherings at Kumbh. And the decisions taken at Kumbh acquire a certain kind of sacredness in themselves. So the point I'm trying to make is this, that Kumbh is not just about faith, it is also about diversity, and diversity not only of styles of living, but also of opinions and views. Kumbh also provides an opportunity of various kinds of people, so to say, to win friends and influence people. I was there for the first time in 1989 as part of a similar exercise. I was invited by the Sarvodaya Mandal, who was having a camp at Kumbh. I spent a couple of nights at their camp, and frankly speaking, though I am a believing Hindu, in fact, the idea of believing Hindu is an oxymoron. I am a Hindu without believing in anything. So I was there, I stayed at the Sarvodaya camp, addressed a gathering. Remember, this is 1989, and the topic of the discussion in which I spoke and which was well attended was about the sectarian politics of communalism and aggression. It was being talked about at Kumbh in the Sarvodaya camp. I, of course, did not take any holy dip because it was too cold for me. And I do not really believe that any dip can take me direct to the heaven. Not interested, not my idea. So that was my brief experience with Kumbh Mela as such. But the idea of Kumbh has been fascinating throughout as I told you, throughout the history and cultural memory of this country. So much so, the part of argumentation I would like to emphasize, that Swami Dayanand Saraswati, who had no patience for any kind of the traditional Puranic ritualism, who was actually vocally critical of Tirth Yatras and holy dips and all that, held a camp at Haridwar Kumbh in 19th century. He put up actually a flag which he described as Pakhand Khandani Pataka, which was an open invitation for disputation and debate to all those who opposed his interpretation of Vedas. So Kumbh has been going on like this, and I think more important than celebrating the Mela character of Kumbh, to my mind, the memory part of Kumbh, the metaphor part of Kumbh is more important and more thought-provoking, more exciting to me, personally speaking.
Thank you very much. Let me say just a word then about my own experience of Kumbh. I actually went to an Arda half Kumbh for a few days 6 years ago and stayed in the camp of an industrialist who put up a tent there for the whole month from Allahabad. So I had a bit of an experience. When it came time to think about this year, I was in conversation with a colleague of mine, Rahul Mehrotra, who is an architect and urban planner and has written about Mumbai, and of course I've written about another city, the city of Kashi or Benares, and both of us interested in cities, But here we had an opportunity to study a temporary city, a city that was set up for just a month and a half on the riverbed and the delta of the Ganga and Yamuna and, of course, Saraswati rivers. And the temptation of doing this, both as an urban planner and someone who was involved in religious studies, was really great. So we thought, why not? We'll spend some time at the Kumbh and study what we can learn from our own perspectives. And before long, we were joined with people from Harvard School of Public Health and Harvard Business School and lots of other people who are interested in management and other aspects of the Kumbh Mela. And that really opened my own eyes to the multiple perspectives on this great cultural undertaking. Yeah. That, yes, it has all of its religious dimensions, and yet at the same time, this is an incredible cultural and human phenomenon to set up a city that will house essentially anywhere between 5 and 7 million people, to do so after the rivers have receded and you know what the shape of the land is going to be, sometime around October, to proceed to outline the roads and the wide roads and the narrow roads and the electricity and the infrastructure, all of the systems that are part of any city, and to go through the politics of land allotment, who gets their camp where, all of this part of the management and infrastructure of an amazing city. So as we were there during the 5 days before I came here, there were teams of people actually doing the mapping of this city. And if you look on the web, it's called Mapping the Kumbh Mela. That's our website. And some of them really were mapping. They mapped all of the akharas, for example, with their porches and their sort of front rooms and dhunis and back rooms and kitchens and sanitation facilities. We had other people who were interested primarily in sanitation. And one of my students, along with a couple of others, their job during the 5 days we were there was to look at toilets. And they went out and took pictures of lots and lots of toilets with the GPS to figure out where they were and the different kinds of sanitation facilities that had been provided. And to actually a very impressive extent, the sanitation facilities are there. We had others who were interested in markets and the establishing of markets there. And then folks like myself who were really interested in what all of this infrastructure provides for the people who come to the Mela. And that's the most important thing. This is set up for the pilgrims who come in their thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions over the course of time, and not just on the big bathing days, though they do come for that, the next of which is the day after tomorrow, on the Paush Purnima, but who come at all the times. And perhaps the most wonderful morning I spent there was simply on the beach of the Sangam, with sitting over long periods of time with families and just watching what was going on, because these are people, mostly village people and townspeople from all over North India and Central India, who have come for one purpose only, and that is to bathe in the Sangam of the rivers. Well, I shouldn't say one purpose only. They also have come to have the darshan of the sadhus, of the Nagababas, of the holy people who are there. And another perspective on the Kumbh, of course, is the perspective that one would gain, as Jim has, from the standpoint of the akharas, of the orders of sadhus who have their camps there. And that really, in my language of cities, that is sort of the gullies of Varanasi. That's the part of it that is very compact, very dense, with dhunis, with each of the akharas and each of the families, as Jim was saying, that each of these pariwars that are part of each and every akhara, and some of them have multiple, 50, 52 pariwars. So that's another perspective. What is it like for those sadhus who live in such different circumstances over much of the year to be together in their hundreds of thousands there, and to basically receive the darshan, give the darshan to folks who come and give them blessings, ashirvad, prasad. So that perspective is another. Then there's the perspective of the volunteers who come, and they volunteer for a week or a month or longer to work with one of the camps, to live there in the Sarvodaya camp perhaps, or in the Ramakrishna Mission camp, or in the camp of Deshananda, the head of the Junakara. And they live there for some time, and they're basically doing service. And then there are the Hare Krishnas, ISKCON, who come basically to spread the name of Krishna and the love of Krishna. And they're not interested too much in bathing at all. They're there basically to provide a kind of witness and mission to the rest of the pilgrims at the Kumbh. And they're the performers who come, and the people who go to the Leelas. So just so many angles from which to see this incredibly complex human event. And that was the exciting thing for me, not just as a scholar of religion, but as someone who realized if you're going to study something like this, it has many dimensions that move quite beyond the subject of religious studies into the way in which a culture like India has developed the expertise to manage such an incredibly large human event, and so successfully, really, with police and security and health clinics and hospitals and ambulances and you know, the whole thing. So I was very, very moved by this, and look forward to being able to spend a longer time there at some other time. So maybe we could extend this a little bit, and I would ask you, Jim, the experience of those who are in the akharas, like the Ramanandis. What do you do all day there when, I mean, you're a scholar, so you're sort of a participant observer, but how do you experience this from the innermost part of that huge city?
Well, I mean, as I said, it's a very different time for the sadhus themselves. The period of the Mela, it's probably the least religious or spiritual time of their you know, the 3 years between each Mela. But what they do mainly, what's going on is the main events, apart from the big baths where everyone goes in a big procession to the river to bathe in these very ornate, fancy processions. They used to have elephants and horses, now it's on trucks and jeeps. I'm sure you've seen all the pictures. But otherwise, what's going on, there are bhandaras, there are feasts going on in each camp, more or less every day. There's 2 or 3 in various different camps. There's people coming around giving invitations, and they are usually for someone who's being raised up to the level of a mahant, which is a difficult word to translate because the sort of obvious English parallel is an abbot. But really it's more like a commander, it's more like a military commander, because the whole thing, these camps are very much arranged along military lines. And there used to be big battles. On the days of the Shahi Snans, the big bathing days, it's the ultimate prestige goes to the camp, the akhara that can bathe at the time that is deemed to be most auspicious by the Pundit astrologers. And so in the past there used to be these big battles over this. That has, for the most part, calmed down. There are occasionally little flare-ups between minor subsects. And in fact, going back to what Purushottam was saying as well about disputes, and it's an area for disputation, and it's not always spiritual disputes either. It often comes down to notions of power and who can occupy either who can bathe at the right time, or who can be in command of the sects. And I'm intrigued to see what happens when I turn up this time, what the state of my camp is going to be, because when I went there, when I turned up 3 years ago at Haridwar, I was very surprised. I pulled in a jeep, and the headlights lit up about a dozen commandos in full military gear sitting there with machine guns. I don't know what was going on. And so I instantly inquired what's happened. And at the previous Shahi Snan, at the previous big bath, there had been a pitched battle between 2 sections of my camp, because one sadhu had been raised to the position of Sri Mahant. There are 13 Sri Mahants in our camp. And it was a dispute over caste, because most of the senior Ramanandis are Brahmins or Rajputs, Kshatriyas. And this Mahant, this Sri Mahant, was a Arya Yadav, which derogatory statements were made about him being a milkman. And Purushottam knows all about this. He's written a great deal about how disputes over caste have kind of governed the history of the sect that I'm involved with. And a few people were hospitalized, and this dispute never actually got resolved. It wasn't clear whether the Akaras, the ex-sort of military wing of the Ramanandis, were going to accept him as a Sri Mahant or not. Even by the time I stayed there for 3 weeks or something, by the end it was still going on. There were still threats of more fights. The police were involved all the time. They were threatening to stop them from bathing at the next bar. So there was a real tension going through. And a good friend of mine, his guru, who's this very well-respected Sri Mahant, who's led his troop of sadhus around India, I think it's 4 times. He's known as Moni Baba because he kept silent for 12 years. He's got a huge head of jata dreadlocks like me, and he got hit by a rock in this battle and was hospitalized for 2 days. So his gang were extremely agitated about all of this and were, threatening to cause trouble, and it never got resolved. So I'm interested to see what's going on when I get back.
We'll be interested in hearing too, Jim. That's very interesting. And Purushottam, you've spent so long studying Kabir, but of course, Kabir had no use for these pilgrimages at all. In some ways, this was a part of the ritual, part of the tradition that a bhakt like Kabir, Nirgun bhakt, wasn't interested in. Would you still say that there's a strong stream of this in
No, in fact,
today?
that's really an important question. I'll come to that. But before that, I would just like to relate with what Jim was saying. In fact, Kumbh is a moment. Kumbh is a symbol. And like any moment or like any symbol, we realize its full significance only if we put it as a part of a whole narrative. Otherwise, in itself, it does not really convey much, except probably the exotica. And that is, to my mind, one of the problems with the modern, quote-unquote modern ways of looking at gatherings like Kumbh. The gauge is at the exotica, at the sadhus, at the Naga sadhus in particular, and their display of emotions and raw display of emotions and all that. But Kumbh is not just about exotica. As I was saying, it's also about disputations. It's also about settling the issues and discourse. And this goes much back in the history. In a text composed in 1655 by someone called Mubad Shah, the text is known as the Bastane Majahid, a kind of school of manners or encyclopedia of religions. In this text, Mubad Shah actually mentions a ferocious conflict between Vairagis and Sannyasis, that is Shaiv Sadhus and Vaishnav Sadhus, at the occasion of Kumbh in 1640 in Haridwar. And the issue, again, there was symbolism that who will take the bath first. But the substance was and always is that which sect enjoys more political power with the powers that be. And also which sects enjoys more financial clout. So the point I'm trying to make by talking all about this is that it's not just so-called spiritual. It is very much political. It is very much directly related with the secular life. Now, second, coming to your point also. And Jim, by the way, you mentioned this conflict on Yadav Mahant of Ramanandis. In fact, in my research, I have come across to uncontestable evidence that Ramanandis had been interrogating the Brahminical supremacy all along. In fact, the whole idea of Ramanand being a Brahminical scholar who could not probably have any interactions with the so-called lower castes is a very, very recent construct. Ramanand has been associated in Indian tradition with people like Kabir and Raidas, not for nothing. So Ramanandis, you are a Ramanandi and you can be proud of this, Ramanandis have been interrogator of the Brahmin supremacy right since their beginning. Now, so far as this conflicts are concerned and various kind of caste issues are concerned, and you were talking about Kabir. No, Kabir of course had no use for all this. But again, Kabir Panthis have a camp at Kumbh. Every year they have a camp. And please, I'm not saying this with any kind of irony or any kind of sarcasm, because just like Dayanand Saraswati, Kabir Panthis also recognize that whether you have faith in the sacredness of holy dip, or you have faith in spiritual powers of taking a bath at a particular moment or not, Kumbh provides an opportunity to reach out to the people. And not just reach out to the people, but also to engage with people in disputations, and it provides an opportunity to you to make your point. So whether you are a Kabir Panthi, or you are a Dayanand Saraswati, or you are Ramakrishna Paramhans, Vivekananda, all that, Kumbh is a traditional way for the entire Hindu community, which has no fixed doctrine, which has no central dogma. Kumbh is one of the mechanisms, one of the methods of this Hindu community to decide and evolve the boundaries and settle the issues. Therefore, Kabir Panthis are there, even if Kabir personally himself had no faith in any kind of Kumbh or any kind of ritualism of that kind. But it's not just about ritual, that is the point.
Well, and I might also say that we know for a fact that in the early days of the organization of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, the Dharma Samsads that they had were organized at the Kumbh. I mean, there were a lot of, and Dharma Samsads take place there today. Among the students that I had there were a number. We had a seminar, a workshop at Harvard during the fall semester to study what we could of the history and meaning of the Kumbh, everything from the texts of the Bhagavata and Puranas to the more recent historical works that have been written about Prayag and the Kumbh. But among the things that the students became most fascinated with and that I myself found most interesting was exactly something that Purushottam was referencing, and that is the opportunity at the Kumbh Mela to make a point about something. And this Kumbh has been called the Green Kumbh in relation to the number of initiatives there are from all sides to think about the Tirtha Yatra from an environmentally green point of view. And one could see this in so many different aspects. Whole corps of people who's wearing red aprons, whose job it was to pick up trash in the streets and along the Ganga. And I spent some time on 2 different days with Swami Chidanand Saraswati, whose Paramartha Niketan in Rishikesh has been at one of the several groups that has been important in the Save the Ganga kind of movement. And many of those people were there. And they're not the only ones. They have started this Ganga Action Parivar, which is a different kind of parivar, a sort of joining together of all the different groups, and there are many of them, that are concerned with the health of the Ganga, the Yamuna, and other Indian rivers. So the last afternoon that I was there, I was with Swami Chidanand and a number of his people and some of our students who were learning by doing, so to speak, and we spent about an hour before going in for a Ganga Snan, picking up trash along the Sangam beach and then taking a boat out to one of the islands, shallow islands where the actual Sangam is, and raking up the marigolds and the little bits of plastic and paper that were there. And, you know, this is a very interesting job to be trash collectors at the Kumbh, and one that I was grateful to participate in, and so were my students, that there's a level of awareness that is generated here, and not just by Swami Chidanand, but by many of the others as well, who are interested in what this means to be a green Kumbh, the a new sort of green yatra movement where toward the end they will give out plant saplings as prasad and discourage the placing of marigold garlands in the river and all those little boats that have some sort of bits of plastic in them. Maybe one flower is enough, not a whole garland, not a whole boat full. So this was one of those outreach moments that I think is a kind of moment of activism, of Ganga action at the Kumbh. And I will say one more thing. It's not just the action of symbolically raking up the garlands and all of the trash, but along with that, there was a big public meeting, 2 days of it really, in which Swami Chidanand had called together the mayors of cities up and down the upper reaches of the Ganga and the governor of Uttaranchal, who is sometimes called the Green Governor, and really engaging the mayors in the work of thinking about the infrastructure of cities that allow raw sewage to be, and chemical waste and other things simply to be poured into the Ganga. Now, as for the bathing issue, that's an interesting question. We had a conversation with one of the teachers, dear friend Srivats Goswami, who has a camp there that is really for the purpose of learning, devotion, spending a kalpavas, a month-long retreat in conditions that you would call a little bit of tapasya, maybe. And he doesn't bathe at all. He feels that though his devotees do, the quality of the water is just something he will not do. Shankaracharyas have gotten together and said until they do something about the Ganga, they're not going to participate in the next big bathing day. And then there are others who have a different consciousness about it. I have to confess that many of my students did, from that sandbar, have a holy dip, and so did I. So it was a wonderful experience. But I would be interested, from your standpoint, Jim, is the holy dip something that you engage in as a practice when you attend the Kumbh?
No, absolutely, every time. But I'm very interested to hear what you're saying, because this is, I think, the first time I've ever had misgivings. I don't know if it's because of better media reporting and being able to access news on the internet, but I've never heard so many sort of dire reports about the toxicity of the water and it being 100 times over the World Health Organization's levels for bathing. The latest I had actually was from a friend who just emailed me to say that they know someone who's just come back from the Sangam having bathed and fallen into a coma. Now, Roddy at the back there just told me, which sounds quite incredible. I'm sure there must be other...
A coma of ecstasy or a coma of what exactly? I mean...
I don't know, but apparently he's in a Delhi hospital. But you've obviously you're not too worse for wear for having bathed in there. So I think I probably will do it again. I'll definitely keep my mouth shut as ever. But.
Yes, I didn't sip. But the thing I would say is that of course they've opened the dam somewhat so that the flow of the rivers is greater now. But, in Varanasi it looks a lot worse than it does in Prayag, to be sure. And people have been at this for such a long time. I mean, all of you probably heard of Veerbhadra Mishra and the Swachha Ganga campaign. But this really is the moment, I think. There is a kind of turn of consciousness that I hope that we're seeing now, and that may be furthered by the kind of messaging that's done at the Kumbh. I wonder if this is a time that we might open this for some questions from those of you who have crowded in here to hear. And here's someone right in the front row, and if those who have the microphones could then look at someone standing in the back. Yes? He's asking to talk more about the changing form of the Kumbh, what it was and what it is now, and what was it before. Anyone want to address that?
Yeah, I'd like to say a few words. I think well, Diana will know one of our esteemed colleagues, Sheldon Pollock. I remember reading something by him recently where he said for scholars of India to point out stasis to say things aren't changing is akin to a mortal sin. But I think actually within the Sadhu camps, at least for a couple of hundred years, things are probably fairly similar, bar the loudspeakers that are constantly blaring out these days. But I was very interested in what you were saying about the traders, and we were talking earlier, and Diana said that the traders are rather disappointed that they're not doing so well. You know, these guys selling trinkets and stuff turn up for business, and they're not doing a roaring trade, because the historical reports show that in the past, the Kumbh Mela was very much about trading. You know, there was the bathing was obviously very important, and the sadhu camps and the darshan of the sadhus. But a lot of people came to trade, and that's actually still the same with other melas. In October, I was at the Dasera Mela in Kulu, and there is a religious component to it. The gods come for darshan of the main god Raghunath of Kulu, but mainly people go because it's the end of the harvest season, everyone's got money, everyone's got things to sell, and there's a lot of business goes on. And particularly at the Haridwar Kumbh Mela, that used to be one of the main raison d'etre. In fact, the sadhus themselves were big traders. Yes. But it seems to me that now that over the last 100 years or so, as the Kumbh has become a bigger phenomenon, it's actually become more religious, rather than, you know, the usual claims of Kali Yuga and everything's getting more commercialized. If anything, my hunch is that the Kumbh is getting more religious and less commercial.
I think the issue of the traders is one that some of the people on our research team were very interested in, because they did interviews with a lot of the street vendors, especially, because they're trying to put some restrictions on them. But a lot of them are just selling blankets and shawls and trinkets and religious items. And I think the fact that the numbers of people that are alleged to be present at the Kumbh has been astronomical, has brought more people there thinking, oh, well, we're going to make a rip-roaring business, and indeed they do, I'm sure, at the big Shahi Snan days or around them. But in between, they may be somewhat disappointed that there are not 20 million people here all the time. And I think the numbers estimated is another one of the issues. You know, one member of the Junakara was saying 100 million people will be here. Last time they said 30 million on the great bathing days. Now they're estimating maybe 20 million, 8.2 million on Makar Sankranti. So the estimates of the sort of population of the Kumbh are so varied that the traders may be disappointed, who have come a long way with the big stock of material.
Yeah, then
yes.
In fact, in any society which is not dominantly capitalistic or market driven, the melas or fairs are essentially about trade. It's whether it's Kumbh or it's any other mela or any fair, it's essentially about trade. And so around trade, or maybe sometimes around the ritual, a whole phenomenon develops in which trade, ritual, tradition, everything plays its role. Now, so far, I find that point very interesting, that Kumbh is turning more religious these days. To my mind, the reason is that the rest of the life is turning too commercial these days. And therefore, we need a separate kind of compartment for doing our religiosity. And therefore, not only Kumbh, the entire India is turning more religious these days. I never visited the famous Hanuman temple in Delhi. Many of my students, in spite of their leftist persuasions, I have spotted them at Hanuman Mandir in Delhi, to their great embarrassment. So I think I don't mind the society turning more religious, but I really feel uncomfortable with society turning religious with a kind of sense of apology, with a kind of hypocrisy inbuilt. I'm not making any comment on Kumbh. I'm just making a general observation that the more society turns empty from within, the more it turns religious outside. So this is happening with the society also.
Someone in the back, who has the mic at the moment?
Right here in the center.
It's in the center.
Yes.
Okay, if you have the mic, ask a question then.
Okay. See, first of all, I need to ask you that, do you think this Kumbh as a platform is defining Hinduism? And what message it's actually giving to the Western world? Does it attract Hinduism, or does it just a mere platform to attract business? Or do you think it's a true platform to tell the world that what Hinduism is all about? Because as per one Hindu concept is the darshan. Now, when you look in the deity of your God, that is for many Hindu believers. For some, it's the spiritual prayers that you do in your mind. I mean, there is endless definition to it. So do you think Kumbh is a right platform, or we can do something better to attract Westerners in giving the right message, what is Hinduism all about? Thank you.
If I could just say a word to that, I think that there are so many Kumbhs in a way. I mean, you can't really say the Kumbh as a platform because there are so many perspectives, so many voices. There are teachers, there are sannyasis, there are sadhus, there are merchants, there are village people who come with faith in their hearts, and there are, lots of skeptics who come anyway. It's not really a single platform for anything, but it does kind of evoke the diversity of Hinduism. I don't think it defines the diversity, because actually there are lots more people from Central and North India than from South India, for example. So you wouldn't want to say this is, the festival of all India. It is in one way, but there are a lot of people who don't participate and are not drawn to it. And I think in terms of looking at it from the standpoint of the West, there needs to be much more attention to the complexity of the whole Kumbh Mela and its duration, and not just this focus on the Naga Babas and the exotic things that make the newspaper in New York or London or elsewhere. And I think to move back from that toward a more complex view of this amazing phenomenon does more justice to the Hindu sensibilities that have brought it into being. Who has the mic now?
Yeah, there is a question.
Yes.
Altaji, their relationship with the state of Jaipur, both in the religious field and in the military field at the time of the founder of Jaipur. My second question is to Professor Eck. The role of the sadhus and Kumbh, the evolution of early Buddhism, Jainism, and in more recent times to Sikhism.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I should have mentioned that earlier. Jaipur and Galtaji, which is a shrine on the edge of the city, is very important in the formation of the Ramanandi order with which I'm associated. First of all, there's a legend of a still very famous Ramanandi sadhu called Krishnadas Payohariji, who is meant to have gone to Galtaji and then defeated in a sort of magical yogic context a tantric sadhu there called Taranath. And Payohariji was, the queen, the Maharani, was a devotee of his. The king was a devotee of the tantric sadhu, but the king was so impressed that it's all mythological, but it's explaining a shift in the allegiance of the rulers of Jaipur to the Ramanandi sect. So that was very important, and also associated with Galtaji at the beginning of the 18th century was the formation of all their military wing. It's when they really got together as a force on a wider scale, and it was from Jaipur or from Rajasthan that the Ramanandis then spread eastwards, and their influence spread across all of North India. And when they then came into contact with other sadhu orders and started fighting these big battles over who would control the trade and who would have the right to get donations from pilgrims at various melas and at pilgrimage places.
I'm not sure I could do justice to your question about the sadhus, but obviously the roots of renunciation are very deep in Indic culture, whether it is Hindu or Jain or Buddhist. These are very significant and they have much to do with the whole range of the culture and not simply one stream of it. One of the things that interested me at this Kumbh was to talk to a couple of people in the Junakara and realize that in their tradition there is one of the 52 families of the Junakara that is Buddhist. And when in a couple of weeks, when the Dalai Lama visits the Kumbh, he probably will be there at the very spacious camp of the head of the Junakara, Swami of Deshanandji. And there's a reason for that, and I think it is a sense of the connection between the Junakara and the Tibetans, really. As for the Sikhs, there are akaras of Sikhs as well, to be sure. So I think this tradition of ascetic, quasi-militant renunciants that has been part of the sadhu complexity of North India is something much broader than anything one would call Hindu. Questions? Who's next? There's someone in the very back standing with a white kurta.
My question to Dr. Purushottam Agarwal.
Yes.
What are the perspectives in future aspects of Kumbh Mela? As you said, Kumbh is a movement and symbol of significance and does not convey much exotic art.
Sorry?
Much exotic art.
No, I am saying that we must look at Kumbh, as Diana puts it, in its complexity. We must look at Kumbh in its totality, and we can do so only if we look at Kumbh as part of a larger cultural narrative. I am not saying that it does not convey much exotic art. Quite the contrary, I am saying that to a Western eye, Kumbh unfortunately conveys much of the exotica only, not anything else. That's my concern. And because of our colonial past, we still get influenced in looking at our own culture and at our own history. We still get influenced with the colonial gaze. Therefore, for us also, the most interesting and the most exciting moment of Kumbh becomes the Naga Sadhu. For my mother, for instance, it was not. My mother, I never found interested in watching or listening about the adventures of Naga Sadhus at Kumbh. So this is the point I'm trying to make, that for God's sake, not only Kumbh, the entire Indian cultural experience needs to be seen as much more complex than funny or mysterious exotica. That is my point precisely.
Yes, thank you. Who has the mic here? Could you give it to the gentleman standing in the back who's had his hand up since the beginning?
Thank you. I researched Christian theology myself, and I got interested by what you said about Kumbh being a decision-making event, because I study early church, and the Kumbh sounds like a contemporary, active version of the early Christian councils in a way. But Christianity has its own idea of the text and the orthodoxy of the texts, and going back to that, I just was very interesting if there is some idea of consistency and getting back to tradition in the way the decisions are made in the Kumbh Mela. How does the tradition, how is the tradition alive, or is it a completely pluralistic decision making?
I think it is pretty pluralistic. Within the Ramanandis, it comes down to a democratic vote between the different senior Sri Mahants. But then there are so many different traditions, so many different camps, as Diana was mentioning earlier. I think which is why it's hard to say that the Kumbh projects the thoughts or the voice of the unified Hinduism, because there are just so many different teachings coming across, even though most of them would hark back to the Vedas, for example. But there's no single organized, overarching church as such to hold it all together.
Yeah, if I may. In fact, not directly related to your question, but in a way relating with that. Jim belongs to Ramanandi order, and it was at the Kumbh in Ujjain, Singhast to be precise, Singhast in Ujjain, precisely on the 11th May 1921, that Bhagavadacharya Ramanandi declared the independence of Ramanandij from Ramanujij. And this happened because the Bhagavadacharya had sent a written challenge mind you, to the Ramanuji order to enter into a disputation with him. Ramanuji chose not to enter in that disputation. So Bhagavadacharya noted in his diary and later on in his Atmakatha, autobiography, that this was the day of deliverance for the Ramanandi order. So this is the kind of role Kumbh has been playing, not in the life of just Ramanandi order, but also in the lives of many other orders. Of course, Hinduism is not an organized religious or doctrinaire tradition like Catholic Christianity or Protestant Christianity for that matter. But still, Hindus have been trying and have been trying for centuries to have some sense of basic minimum coordinates as sects, as community, as a larger religious tradition. Since I have studied Ramanandi a bit deeply, so I know about them, I am sure all other religious order of Hindus have such moments in their histories, and Kumbh has played a crucial role in all such moments. That is the cultural significance of Kumbh.
Thank you. Another question here? Yes, in the front.
In this age of IT and IITians and science and rationalism, we have seen that the popularity of Kumbh Mela is not diminishing. It's rather growing with each Mela. We are seeing the participants rising. What it is that has kept the faith alive?
Well, this is the age of science, I agree with you, but I doubt about rationalism. And I also do not think that the so-called science and rationalism go together. Most of my most irrational and superstitious friends come with very high degrees from IITs. I am not making any comment on IITs, in fact, I am just stating a fact. And about the technology, I did not have a holy dip in 1989 because it was too cold for me. In 2001, I visited Kumbh. I still did not take a holy dip in the water itself, but I was introduced to a phenomenon in 2001. The entire world was introduced to that phenomenon, and that was called virtual dip. And I had virtual dip on the net,
Virtual
on the
dip,
internet.
yes.
And it's not a joke. Virtual dip with all the mantras, entire rituals you doing on your laptop. I had that holy dip. And I enjoyed it thoroughly. So the point I'm trying to make is this, that any culture grows with the technology available. Indian culture or Hindu culture in particular is also growing with technology available, not necessarily towards rationalism. So I do not think that the more scientific, quote unquote, a society becomes, more tolerant or more rational it becomes. No, I don't think so. Rationalism is different. Rationalism has to be achieved by a society differently. Achieving in science does not necessarily mean achieving in rationalism. A historian is sitting down there. I think he will bear me out.
I think it's important to say, though, that there are many of the photographs that are taken at the Kumbh of, some sadhu with a cell phone or sunglasses or something like this, as if this were a total anachronism. And I think it's important to recognize that for many of these people, this is not an anachronism at all. I mean, sadhus don't withdraw from the technology of the age. And why should they? I mean, they are able to organize their affairs far better with cell phone than without one. So it's not, oh, isn't this an odd conjunction of sadhu and cell phone? And the other thing I think is important is that, we see in America with the IT revolution that the people who are able to chant the Samaveda from end to end at important religious moments in the local Hindu temple are precisely the scientists who have come to the big information technology companies in the suburbs of Boston. So there is a kind of wisdom or knowledge or skill that links these two. I think we may have time for one last question or two.
May I ask a question related to numbers?
Yes.
Numbers linked to the Kumbh.
Yeah.
Dr. Ek mentioned that right at the back in saffron, what is the connection of numbers to the Kumbh? You mentioned it takes place in 3, 6, 9, and now we have the Mahakumbh, which is 12. Yugs are also divided in multiples of 3. Could you shed light on the number logic of the Kumbh?
I don't think I can shed light on that. I mean, the numbers are related to astrological issues, and I'm no astrologer. So, I mean, and it's not exactly every 3 years here or there. I mean, depends on how things line up in the heavens. So, I don't have any view on numbers. Do you, Jim?
Well, no, I'm no astrologer either, but I think one way it can be explained is that the cycle of Jupiter is 12 years, and there's 4 places, so it's every 3 years in each place. But that's as much as I can say, I'm afraid.
Yes, we'll take one final question over here.
In a secular state, religion gets relegated to the personal sphere of one's life, a very sacred sphere that becomes, and the profane or the public is reserved for the politics or the other public spheres of one's life. Then how does something, a big as congregation as the Kumbh, signifies one's identification with one's religion? Like, my personal identity with the religion may be very different, but the identity in a congregation, in a very public sphere, which is not personal at all, or public sphere as public as a Mela, or as public as a city of Banaras, where does I negotiate my identity? Is it one being Hindu, or is it we being Hindus together in this Mela as against another religion? And secondly, there's another question, I'll make it very quick. Is it the geography of a city which makes it sacred, or is it the sacred, is it the religion itself which renders a city its sacred geography?
Do you want to start? This is a good final question. Why don't we each have a crack at it?
So, second question, I think is for Diana best to answer. For your first question, I am a secular as well as a Hindu, and I see no contradiction in this. That is point number one. The second point about in a secular state, religion being kind of given an exile to the personal sphere. I'm not saying of you, but most of us Indians, when we talk of secular states, we have Western states in mind. The fact of the matter, however, remains that the President of United States of America takes oath on Bible, unlike in India. The United States currency bills carry the legend, "In God we trust." For an atheist, this could be a real moral dilemma to use such a currency note which says that "In God we trust." So let us actually try to get away from this very simplistic notion of secular versus religious, and secular necessarily relegating the religious to the background. It never happens. Because whether in East or in West, religion is not just about your private faith, it's also about a collectivity with all its rituals, all its memories, and all its struggles, all its achievements, and all its blind spots. And you cannot run away from that. That is number one. Secondly, therefore I told you I am a Hindu and I am a secular. I have no hesitation in saying this. So far as the geography and sacredness is concerned, to my mind, whatever little I have studied of various sacred geographies, to borrow the title of a very famous book, whatever I have studied little of that, actually the notion of sacredness can be associated with anything, not necessarily with a spot, not necessarily with an event, not necessarily with a memory only. It can be each of them, and it can be all these put together. So personally, I don't think that we can have a very definite answer to the question that whether sacred comes first or geography comes first. I do not think so.
Okay, I'll say a word and then we'll let Jim wrap it up. I think as for sacred geography, the most amazing thing about Prayagraj, about this great confluence of rivers, is that that's exactly what it is. When people come to the Kumbh Mela, it's not about going to a temple or going to, I mean, there are temples and murtis and places they might go, but actually it's about the rivers themselves. The way in which these rivers are manifestations, currents that flow with the presence of the divine. That is why they come. Now, as for the so-called secular, I'm very happy that Purushottam has addressed that, but maybe I should say one more thing, which is that those of you who are citizens of India pay for the Kumbh, no matter what religion you are. I mean, the Kumbh Mela is supported both by the government of India and the government of UP. Right. It is a city that has its own adhikari, its own superintendent, its own officers, its own police. It's everything that is set up and paid for to create this city that is run by a district commissioner and an adhikari. So, and that is how it would have to be to create something as complicated as this, at least in the times in which we live today. One might also say that the government of India supports special flights and an airport for the Hajj and for other important religious observances in society. So secular is not the absence of religion, but a kind of equidistance of the state from being representative of only one faith. It is a kind of pluralism in India. Jim?
Well, I
the last word is yours.
Well, I think Diana's answered your second question. But with the first question, what's its significance in a secular India? I don't think, it's not completely a Hindu festival for a start. As we know, the Dalai Lama's going there. There are plenty of secular Hindus going there. I'm going there. But I think something we haven't discussed yet, which is the key, for me, one of the key parts of the whole thing, is pilgrimage. It's something people go to. They take themselves out of their normal daily life and they go and reflect on what are perhaps more important issues. They stop doing what they normally do, and if it's 2 days or a month in the case of the Kalpvasis, they go and think about more important issues and hopefully return to their normal lives more fulfilled or with a better idea of what they're doing, and whether that's in a secular or a Hindu or a Buddhist way, I think that's got to be a good thing.
I want to thank all of you for being here today, and hope that you yourselves will make a trip to the Kumbh.
Thank you, Diana, thank you, Jim, and thank you, Purushottam, for this immersive session on the Kumbh Mela. We have small gifts for the three of you, so please wait before. Book signing will be on the other end, outside the hall on the left-hand side for book